Yes, let's talk about building better teams. A topic that I'm sure we all have an opinion on, especially after the great remote workforce move. So, if you've got any thoughts, hit us up on Twitter, pop them in the comments. You know where to contribute. But I'm really intrigued to see like what's worked best for you and what's worked well for you for your teams. But here's a couple of ideas that I've studied, I've picked up some kind of thoughts, I've got some suggestions. So yeah, let me know what you think. So when something goes wrong, what's your first instinct? Do you tend to ask for help? Because that's totally okay. You'd be forgiven for thinking that collaboration is the way to solve your problem quickly, easily, and without friction. Um, I mean, we always hear the idioms two heads are better than one, and a problem shared is a problem halved. But going beyond language, there are so many ways that this idea that collaboration equals a better solution faster seems to be the accepted answer. Um, if you're moving something heavy, more arms equals more power, right? If you're building something big and complicated, more heads equals more brain power. Now, unfortunately, this isn't always the case. It was the case if you are a villager in the popular game Age of Empires 2. If you'll recall, to get the best way to get a structure built really quickly is to just assign everyone that you have to the task at hand and get them building. When it comes to digital infrastructure that exists outside of video games, things are slightly different for several reasons. Now, in the Mythical Man Month, it's a collection of essays that are widely referenced throughout tech. The idea of a man month is this fictitious unit of time that ties the progress a group of people can make relative to their quantity and subsequent time it takes them to, it creates like a static figure around it, the man month. As you can tell, this is a collection of essays that was published quite some time ago and should be updated to the person month, but I digress. But yeah, the idea that the number of people and the amount of time required to get something done can be interchangeable as commodities, that's only true if you are those villagers in Age of Empires. If the work that you're working on can be sectioned off into subtasks without any interaction, without any communication, then sure, you can just get on well with it. But when a task cannot be partitioned due to its structure or complexity, the application of more effort has no impact on the schedule. Now, software development, it falls in between these two in between these two categories. Tasks can be partitioned, but we need communication in between each subtask. We can't just all assign everyone to the same repo and get going. We really need to define out our tasks, create our user stories, talk about testing, and we really need to be able to put our heads together and chat about our project. But in these situations, the best possible outcome doesn't even come close to an even trade-off between people and hours. Now, it's widely accepted that intercommunication is where the majority of the work lies. So if the task that you're working on, it needs to be separately coordinated, the effort required to complete that section of work increases at a power of n to the power of n minus 1 over 2. So in real terms, what that means is three people will take 3 times as much interaction as 2 to get the work done, and that increases at a near exponential rate, as you can kind of see here. The more people that you get involved in your task, the later it's going to become, the later the software is going to be delivered. Things only get compounded when you have 2 or more people in a meeting. If you're looking at department-wide meetings, suddenly things grind to a halt, and we're required to context switch. We're introducing friction into our day. We know this is. I'm sure this has happened to you. But yeah, the result of this leads to the effort of communication counteracting the division of labour. We end up putting more effort into communicating than we do into the task that we're actually getting done. Anyone who's become a senior or risen in their path will know that when you step up in terms of seniority, meetings become a necessary evil and quickly take over your calendar. This projected timeline, it really shows Brooks' law in action, which is the the idea that just adding manpower to software projects just stands to make them even later. But if we're going to talk about laws, we can't talk about organising people without mentioning Conway's law, and this is kind of our pathway to resolution here. So for anyone unfamiliar with Conway's law, it's a concept that the ways that we organise, they impact the products that we create in an indelible manner. So this was an effect that was observed a long time ago, but essentially it was seen when 8 people were put on a task to create 2 compilers. They were separated out into a group of 5 and a group of 3. And funnily enough, the group of 5 created a compiler that had 5 stages, 5 phases rather, and the group of 3 created a compiler with 3 phases. So the way that we're organized has a real impact on the products that we create. And we know that we can't involve too many people into the paradigm, but we need to collaborate in order to get things done. So how do we counteract this idea of organizational determinism? How do we create teams that aren't hindered by Conway's law? Now, I'm sure that you've definitely heard of the two pizza rule. I'll do a little bit of a recap for anyone that hasn't heard of it. But the two pizza rule is a practice at Amazon that dictates that all teams need to be small enough so they can be fed by 2 large pizzas. Great for the takeaway bill. But instead of turning this idea into a thought experiment around what constitutes a good pizza serving size, we should look at this as a guidance for team building. So Matthew Skelton, in his book Team Topologies, he supports the idea that teams should be by like a maximum of 9 people if you can help it. The idea here isn't to con people out of free pizza, it's to define what small is and to give it a value. And why is it important to define small and give it a value when we're building teams? Well, we're creatures bound by limitations. Whether your team is composed by introverts, extroverts, multi-scale people, people with distinct specialisms, we have hard limits to the number of people that we can form qualitative relationships with. And if we want to work on functioning teams, we need to be able to form quality, strong relationships. So there is a hard limit for this. So British anthropologist Robin Dunbar says that the number of quality relationships you can form as human beings stands at 150. We can recognize more people, we can interact with a great deal more, but functioning teams require quality relationships. So we know that we need a small team. We need to define our number and we need to stick to it. But what's the criteria that we should kind of go down when we're building our teams? But we need to go by ability. And in the DevOps Handbook, authored by Patrick Dubois, he talks about how silos tend to occur when teams become over-specialized. Now, as tempting as it can be to fill your team with a diverse group of specialists in like a sort of heist movie fashion, depending on the group's focus, this can sometimes lead to people this can sometimes lead to the strain of communication at the start of a project becoming overwhelming. If a team's composed of specialists, communication comes with the added difficulty of needing to come up with a shared language and a level understanding for the team. So yes, you need to be able to have your niches, but we kind of need some generalists here. For someone to earn a spot on your team, you ideally want them to have a reputation of a specialist with the capabilities of a generalist. They need to be able to demonstrate their ability to acquire new skills quickly and a keen desire to continuously build their knowledge. Now, as technologists and engineers, we continually hedge our own abilities to be able to acquire new knowledge. Embarking on your team project will require you to enact this in a group capacity. You will need to be able to work together to acquire new knowledge and to build things as a team, as a collective. So you need to have people that are cognizant of their own learning style. what we're trying to achieve here is a sense of collective intelligence. So collective intelligence is a fairly new concept that's being researched. It's been around for decades. I think with the whole misinformation crisis, we've understood what it means to be collectively uninformed, but to be collectively intelligent is described by researchers as a group's ability to perform across a wide variety of tasks. Now, there were some studies carried out on this quite recently using the video game League of Legends. And this was used as an ideal testing ground because people are paired on ability level that have not got a deep understanding of each other, a deep understanding of each other's like learning styles. You might think, what has League got to do with work? Well, massive online battle arena games are often characterized by the idea that we need to make decisions really quickly. We are in these intense competitive environments and we have a defined set of time to be able to complete a task. Sounds a little bit familiar to the places that we work in, right? Well, the speed of decision making in a vast array of businesses is only accelerating, forcing us to be in a position to make and modify decisions on a nearly daily basis to be able to guarantee success. We need to be able to make informed decisions at a faster rate. And the only way that we can do this is by building a group level of intelligence. So the study found that a group's ability to be able to perform well at tasks was largely transferable, meaning that if they could do one thing well, they could do other things well too. And secondly, the measure of a group's intelligence is impacted by their individual attributes and the manner in which they're organized. Sounds very similar to Conway's law, right? Now, the things that can make us collectively intelligent are social perceptiveness, a moderate level of cognitive diversity. So we all need to be able to learn in different ways and understand different areas of a product or a project, and large amounts of communication and the equal distribution of that communication. It can't just come from one person down. Most notably, however, they noticed that decision equity and verbal communication didn't equate to a higher level of collective intelligence. So, in fact, the inverse is true. Researchers found that the teams that achieved collective intelligence and retained that as an ongoing team, they had the least the chat that they used in their chat boxes to communicate with each other. It was the smallest in volume around the most successful teams. What does this mean? It means that these skilled players tended to spend less time communicating by preference. They're good at the game and that's where they want to spend their time. They minimize context switching and they engage in non-verbal cues almost instinctively. Again, this sounds very familiar. This is what we find with software engineering. Context switching can pull us out of the of our problem solving capacity. It can kill productivity. What we need to do here is we need to be able to enable tacit communication. Now, aside from being a very recent Wordle answer, tacit communication is the idea of, it's the manner of recognition that leads to shared understanding. So what we're looking for here is non-verbal cues that are understood and communication patterns that are repeatable. In the context of a company, this means advocating for observability measures, automation, and opting for metrics that everyone genuinely understands, and of course, creating psychological safety so that people can ask questions. Now, organizations are people all the way down. This was communicated in Nigel Kirsten's most recent State of DevOps survey, the 10th anniversary of which was last year. We're just groups of people stacked on top of each other, and companies are, of course, groups of teams working together. Now, in this report, we found that the best performing teams don't just work to collaborate, but they define the types and order of interactions that they have. Now, this may sound like overkill, but when you remove the cognitive load that people undergo with each interaction they gain the ability to be able to focus on the best way to perform at the task in hand. Instead of worrying about whether or not they're asking the right question in the right manner, in the right arena, creating robust systems and sharing them in a uniform way across teams can lower the stakes and help us to push towards being better teams, and organizing ourselves in a near autonomous fashion. So here's a bit of a model. I've been talking a little bit about studies and theoretics, but this is a model that was of overcommunication that was put together by Marissa Goldberg, an expert on remote working styles. And here she demonstrates how we can give the most critical information a life cycle within the companies that we work in. Now, let's take a step back. We've got our team, we've got our strict number, we know how we want people to earn a spot in our team. Now we need to talk about how to organize and how to function within that team. So let's say we've got some information that we need to share. We need to prep our team and let them know that this information is coming. We need to be able to detail that information and let everyone know the context of that information. What does it mean? How is it going to affect everyone? We need to be able to line up the right speakers, resources, enable deep dives so people know that there are the resources to be able to ask for more questions. They're not going to get a sort of, when you do open things up for discussion, it's not just going to be let me get back to you about that. We need to be able to come to these arenas prepared with an expert or someone who's working on the thing that they're proposing on launching. And then we need to be able to listen to feedback that we get. We need to open the forum for discussion, take the feedback that we get from the rest of our team on board, create that equity around communication, and then create a reference for this data to live, a single source of truth. And then lastly, we need to create a cadence where we're revisiting that information over and over again. Is it monthly? Is it a quarterly check-in? We need to make sure that people know that this thing that we've created, it lives and it has a life cycle. Now, the common goal here is to achieve understanding. Now, as Daniel said here, we once famously said that when we should aim to create software that fits inside your head. Things get complicated quickly, and we can't expect change not to happen. We need to be able to lean on the fact that things will get more complicated as we grow, and growth is a constant. If we don't understand the software that we're testing, we're likely to resist the number of times that we test it. Now, as anyone who's read the book Accelerate will know, that optimizing for team performance can be done by tracking these 4 key metrics, all of which you want to lower aside from deployment frequency, which you want to be as high as possible. But if the software that we're working on doesn't fit neatly within our heads, if we're working with too big a batch sizes, if things are getting too complicated for the team at hand, then these metrics will have a near finite value. We're likely to distrust our tests. We won't have the confidence to deploy. And when our systems do inevitably fail, because incidents will always happen, we won't have the understanding or be able to access the knowledge that we need to be able to restore them. Now, using tooling to have our backs in these instances can allow us to roll out changes with ease and safety. And I know that this is not a specific Launch Darkly talk, but an example of this is one of the integrations we have with Honeycomb. Now, if the data that you're working with is showing instability or anomalies, you're going to distrust it. But if you're able to use integrations to your advantage and set up automatic updates to where people check, say if you've got a Slack integration for your for the outcome of your tests or for your deployments. You'll be able to know what's happened, where your deployments sorry what's happened when your deployments have happened. I can't use mouth words today, I'm so sorry. What I'm trying to say is that integrations can take the guesswork out of what you're doing. When a user toggles on and off a flag in the instance of Launch Darkly, you can see who toggled that flag and which flag it is and what's happened, essentially. This helps us to all operate from the same version of the truth, all while increasing the confidence that we can have in our systems and processes while lowering the stakes and the cognitive load that we're working with. What we want to do is we want to lower the cognitive load that we're undertaking with each action. We want to strengthen our systems and make sure that we create patterns that are susceptible and open to change in a way that is expected and anticipated. So I've gone over a lot in this 20-30 minutes, but as a TLDR, what we've learned in the past couple of years around operating good teams is we need to keep them small. We need to define a specific number. We need to select members by the same standardized acceptance criteria. And we need to queue people up to enable tacit communication. We need to have integrations involved in our workload. We need to make sure that we're using observability and monitoring to our advantage, and we're standardizing the communication patterns that we're having so people know how to share what changes. And lastly, we need to make sure that we're minimizing cognitive load for everything. You don't need to tell people things that they already know. The way to instill confidence is over time, and we can do that by keeping the tasks minimal, software small, and keeping our teams contained. So thank you very much. I'm sorry this has been a little bit mouth wordy. If you've got any thoughts or any questions, I really welcome them. As you can tell, this work is very much in flux, but I've got some resources and I'm not going to open the resources. I was actually just going to bring up this last slide.
Which you unshared your screen somehow.
I know.
Today.
Today, I am not doing today very well. But if you want to do today better than I have, then you can go to this web address, get hold of the slides, at your own leisure, and do so while wearing a free pair of socks. So, just
socks. Wait, socks. I want socks.
I know. I don't have them.
Whoa.
Yeah, we do socks now.
Okay. So I have this shirt, but I don't have socks. I love getting socks. That's like my favorite swag item.
They're the most useful, aren't they? I mean,
yeah. So that was, despite the mouth wordy things, that was great. I love hearing all the research you did on the topic, and I guess one of the first thoughts that came to my mind, and by the way, anybody who has questions, please post them in the chat or in the ask a question module as we go here. I'll be sure to ask them. So one of the questions that I had was, you were talking about a little bit about some of the skills of teams, especially when keeping them small. But there was a lot of skills that I feel like, and not to divert onto a very, very big touchy topic, I feel like we don't interview for the skills. We interview for the skills that make teams successful. We interview for a lot of, not we as in Launch Darkly, but as an industry, we interview for a lot of how do you kind of trivia type questions about code, right? And that don't really get at the problem that makes teams effective, which is how they collaborate, not how much trivial knowledge they have about the language that they're using. I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to chat about that, or if any of the research talked a little bit about how you can build these teams, how you find people who can make them successful.
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing to measure, because one of the biggest things that was highlighted in the study, which I stumbled over my words whilst trying to talk about, was that self-awareness is having a good understanding of how you learn, and how other gives you an understanding of how other people learn. And it means that you're able to mold your communication style to fit the team that you're embedded into. So
Yeah.
that's a really tricky thing to measure, because if you give someone something new to master, like if you give someone a tech test that's based on an area that they don't know very well, they can simply Google it and look it up really quickly. So it's
Yeah.
quite difficult
Well,
to
yeah, I agree. I mean, they could. Googling is definitely a good job skill
skill.
anyway.
True.
Yeah, and I think, but I get your point. It's hard to measure some of those things in an interview. Like, there's not like a interviews and like the whole process of recruiting somebody. Like, it's a very limited amount of time. I mean, even with like now we have companies have like 4 or 5, 6 interviews, but I mean, what are we talking about? A handful of hours total,
Mm.
right? Like, how much can you really know about somebody's learning styles and their personality and their in that short of time? I guess you're making guesses.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one of the biggest shifts that we've noticed is that accepting that we're not going to be able to pick up that information in the interview stage. We
Hmm.
might not be able to interview. We'll be able to interview someone who's a good fit, but we won't necessarily know that they're a good fit until they're on the team working with the group of people that they need to be working on. It's that kind of idea that production data can't be faulted. You've got to be able to live in that state of reality. So I think the fact that we've destigmatized the idea of switching jobs
Hmm.
has been quite positive, because you can sometimes only figure out if you're built for an environment by being in it, and making that an okay process to opt out of after X amount
Yeah,
of months is
yeah. Good companies do kind of, I think, not only give people opportunities to move around, but also you have to have a good. I think it's up to at that point the manager to kind of recognize people's strength, help organize a team in a way that plays into people's strengths, right? Like,
definitely.
because you will always have different personalities and strengths on the team, and so it's hard. It can be hard sometimes, I think, to kind of factor all that in when you're trying to build a team, and allowing people to move around gives you the opportunity. I think your point of smaller teams, if you have smaller teams, you actually have ability to move people around a little bit easier, I think, than because they can move to a different team that maybe they're a better fit on.
Exactly, and I think that's kind of why we see the squad model validated by a bunch of in a bunch of studies, and just in real life in general. Like having several squads united around a small problem, and then creating teams that enable other teams, is a really great way of being able to make sure that things can stay quite open to change. Like if if um if 8 people is becoming too much for a certain product, okay, great, we've got a series of other teams that we can look at. um
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts on the squad model? Do you like it?
I think it's great. I think, like you said, it keeps the team small and focused on a particular problem, and allows people to move to things that are interesting to them, right? Like, so, allowing you to switch a squad and say, like, hey, this problem sounds really interesting to me. I'm like particularly passionate about it. I can move over to this squad and focus on that problem. So I think, and even sometimes, like, if you're on a particular thing and you may have been working on it for a long time, and you're like, I need a new challenge, and just being
Mm.
able to switch to something different um, is helps, I think. So So I think it gets at your. You talked, and Meg had a question I want to get to, but it gets like you talked about specialization being overly specialized teams being like individuals on team being can be problematic, but I think when the team has a focus, right? Like you can be generalist within a smaller
Hmm.
focus area, right?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
exactly. Yeah.
So it's not like I'm expecting you to know everything about everything. I'm expecting you to know everything within the small domain that your squad is focused on. So anyway,
Yeah.
Meg had a question for you. Do you have any advice about virtual team building as far as the interactions that aren't directly work related? With remote work, you can't pop out to lunch with a coworker or run into someone in the hallway, have a quick chat. What, if anything, would you do to replace that?
That can be it's so frustrating because nothing can be spontaneous anymore, which is great in a way, but yeah, you kind of need to. The way that I've started to design for that is uh, I've started creating a bunch of coffees and regular like 15-minute meetings with people that I otherwise wouldn't usually work with, and repeating them by like a weird on a weird cadence. So they'll happen like once every 3 weeks and once every 2 weeks, or I'll mix them up a little bit, and that way you can kind of try to mimic the spontaneity. Um, yeah, it's a difficult one. How have you made it work, Ryan?
Oh, it's hard. I'm a terrible person to answer this question because I've been remote for well over a decade. so, um, so I've had jobs where I'm really just interacting mostly with via chat with people,
Hmm.
but I do feel like things changed with the whole pandemic and people moving more remote. And because even then back then I was remote, but I could go into the office and everybody was there, and I may show up every once in a while, right? Like whereas now it's like you go to the office and there may be a handful of people there,
Mm.
and you may not ever really get to kind of interact that way with people that you have to work with on the team. um I do think like we have like the virtual coffees that for teams as well as like larger groups that are great ways to kind of get to know people outside of the scope of like what you're working on. And those conversations I think are important to the general productivity of the team, because
Mhm.
one of the things the pandemic at least taught me, um, in terms of how people work, is because while I've been remote, I never worked for companies where I never met anybody. Like
Mm.
I never actually personally interacted with a single person at the company. And it turns out that you have very little attachment to people who you haven't really gotten to know on a personal level. Like, so if you're just there working on tasks all the time, you really like, okay, well, I just, you kind of it's hard to form an attachment to the company and to the people. And the people's really what, honestly, you end up staying, at least for me. That's what you stay for. You stay for the people. You may like the company, but you stay for the people.
Definitely, definitely. Like, I mean, you can use a bunch of tools like Donut, right, and like integrations to kind of try to mimic those, how often you'd see those people that you would form better connections with. But I think
Yeah.
part of it is like you have to have like a tolerance for it to be forced at the start. Like a lot of what I went over in the presentation, a lot of it is about over communication in the first instance, and that can feel really awkward, and it can feel like you're stating the obvious, and it can feel like you're being really clunky at first. But you need to be able to kind of get over that hurdle to be able to create um, patterns that people recognize, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And when I want to bring up Meg, who asked the question earlier, mentioned, and I think this is also important, like having connections even outside of work. Like she talked about
Mm.
Virtual Coffee, which is another group that just brings a bunch of developers together just to kind of chat. And I think it's good because you can talk about some of the issues you're facing, and and maybe some of the problems even technical or work related, or just those I think now more than ever those kind of things are all very, very important. JJ Thornton had a question. He says, I work for myself and I'm nervous about employing someone, as the person that I employ will have significant impact on the dynamics of my work. Given my own personality quirks, have you any recommendations on filtering people based on my own character flaws so that I may be able to avoid discomfort in the long term? Wow. Okay, that's an interesting question, right?
That's
Knowing
hard.
yourself, knowing your own limitations and trying to form a team that will be successful around it.
Yeah, I to be honest, I don't think you can. There are there's a reason why we there's a reason why we can't get out of our own way. Like there's a reason why we go to other people to kind of like check things that we become like code blind to. I think it's really easy to um I think you kind of do need to solicit someone else's help in these kind of scenarios, because they're going to be able to probably give you the advice that it would take you years to stumble across yourself, right?
I think if I understand you correctly, I think that's a great idea. It's not. I mean, you have to interview them, right? You have to like get to know them to see if you're going to work together well. But
Mm.
maybe get somebody else who knows you, right? Is that what you? That's I'm assuming that's
Yeah.
what. Yeah, you get somebody else who knows you to also interview them, even if they don't work for you. Just be like, I need a third party's advice on who knows me and knows how to work with me on whether this person would be a good fit. That's
Mm.
great advice. I think that's really good advice, especially because you're small and it's like it can be hard to make that judgment on your own. Right?
Definitely. Yeah. It must feel like such like an important decision if you're going to be spending so much time and so much, that's
Mhm.
your right hand person. Yeah.
Yeah, can
Good
be
luck.
can be difficult. This is not a question per se, but I guess if you would you like a copy of the speaker deck? Option goes away if you select the required "Where did we meet?" Um, so so yeah, there's a glitch on the page.
Oh no. Okay, well
Yeah,
tweet us and then I'll get you like a PDF version. We'll sort it out. But yeah.
yeah.
You've
So
got
get
my
your socks,
handle
and then we'll
here.
share the deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, you can flip or go in and launch document, flip the flag to change it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. We'll sneak in.
yeah. I think that's all of this was really, really great advice. I think it can be difficult, especially like remote teams, and like I said, being able to judge like who works better, like having that flexibility that you talked about, I think is super important because when you're in an office, some of that stuff works itself out naturally, whereas like when everybody's remote and on different schedules and this
Mm.
and that, like you need it. Some of it has to be forced, right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, we need to see a pattern to be able to expect it. It's really difficult talking about teams in this way because everything's so abstract,
Mhm.
and it's so much easier when you're talking about a specific project and we built this thing and here's how we work together on building it. And speaking in all these anonymized terms can feel really conceptual and tricky and theoretical, but the advice kind of comes down to the same sort of so the scenarios all seem to expose the same sort of issues, that we need to be able to define our interactions and know how we're going to see information and know who we're going to be able to speak to. And that only comes from over communicating in the first instance, and then we can just hopefully rely on really robust systems.
Yep, yep. Or play League of Legends together, I guess.
Have you been
All
playing
teams
any?
have to play League of Legends together. So
Have you been playing any good games recently? You're a Halo fan, from what I can remember, right?
yeah, Halo, Destiny, yeah, Apex Legends. So
Hey.
not really like Apex Legends is a little bit more of like a team-based thing. So, but yeah, not. I, I don't. I've never played League of Legends, so it was like I don't know that I know the how that applies. You know what I mean? Like I don't know the interactions on League of Legends, so I don't know how people collaborate. But I mean, I get the analogy made sense, but I also like I don't know the game.
Yeah, I think I think it would be a better. I think something like Overwatch or like Team Fortress or something where that you have
Yeah,
really specific different characters that you jump into is a much
strengths.
better, yeah,
Hmm.
analogy. So I don't know
That
if
makes
anyone
sense.
has any really good like video game studies that they found, like hit me up. This has just become a recent obsession of mine. So
All right, Jess.